Hello and welcome to this special webinar. Now, Nottingham Forest Community Trust is committed to equality, diversity and inclusion. We work hard to promote inclusivity throughout all of the programmes and our work across Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. Throughout February, we've been celebrating LGBTQ History Month, and today we're joined by guests from a very special charity, that's Fighting with Pride, which works alongside LGBT veterans, service personnel and their families. Now, before I properly introduce Caroline and Gemma, we just wanted to provide a bit of background in case you aren't aware of the ongoing work that Nottingham Forest Community Trust does with veterans across our county. Thanks to the incredible support and funding from Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust, we're able to provide our Forest Forces programme, which tackles social isolation in veterans by providing a variety of regular activities and events. Now, these events come in all shapes and sizes, from coffee mornings to comedy nights and day trips. However, they're all designed to do one thing, and that's to bring people together from different backgrounds and armed forces communities. We also currently hold the Ministry of Defence Employee Recognition Scheme Gold Award, which recognises the outstanding transferable skills that ex-service personnel can bring to organisations just like ours. Anyway, that's enough from me for now. It's time to introduce our guests and find out more about the vital work of Fighting with Pride. So first, let me introduce Caroline Paige, who is the Chief Executive of Fighting with Pride, and also Gemma Warden, who's part of the charity's community support team in the Midlands. Good afternoon to both of you.
Good afternoon, Martin. Lovely to see you. I'm Caroline. I'm the Chief Executive of Fighting with Pride.
And Gemma, hello to you.
Hi, so I'm Gemma and I'm the Veterans Community Worker for the Midlands.
Brilliant. Really good to have you both with us today. So I think maybe the best place to start our discussion is to provide a bit of context about why there's a need for organisations like Fighting with Pride in the first place. And I guess to do that, it's important to understand a little bit more about the experiences of LGBTQ veterans in the military. So, Caroline, I know that you've got first-hand experience of serving in the Royal Air Force. So would you mind starting us off by telling us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the Royal Air Force in 1980, and I normally say I was only 4 when I joined to stop people guessing my age. But and I managed to serve for 35 years. But when I joined the Air Force, I was aware that there was a gay ban in place. And the gay ban had been across all of the armed forces since 1967, really, when the military was given dispensation against the 1967 Sexual Offences Act, which allowed it to be, it was deemed to be an illegal law eventually, but that didn't happen until January 2000. So in that period, if you were outed as being LGBT plus, then you face the consequences of that. I grew up in a military family. I grew up in an army family, and I identified as a girl from the age of 5. And so I grew up in that environment where it wasn't very friendly at all. In fact, it was pretty hostile to difference, and therefore I was told in no uncertain terms that it was unacceptable for me to be like that. And so I ended up having to hide who I was. And of course, I joined the Air Force. Like most people, we all have different reasons for joining the military. And mine was because as a youngster, I joined the Air Cadets because I had a fascination in aeroplanes. And I found myself in a glider, having done a course on my own, as a 15-year-old, 2,000 feet above the ground, going, wow, I need to do more of this. And so I applied for a flying scholarship for a fixed wing powered aircraft. Never expecting to get that, but I did, and I ended up with a pilot's license, but with no money to do anything about that. So that's what took me into the Air Force. So I knew I was joining the military, which was hostile to LGBT plus people. But I thought because I'd had to hide who I was, and we have to remember we're talking back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on, where there was different levels of awareness and acceptance and inclusion in those days. And a huge lack of awareness, that nobody understood the difference between being gay or being transgender. And in fact, the term transgender wasn't really used at all in those days either. So I knew that I was at risk of being outed. And being thrown out of the military. And I ended up being a fast jet navigator. I ended up on fighter aircraft during the Cold War. This was the heart of the Cold War. And we were scrambling at all times of the day and night in all sorts of weathers to intercept Soviet long-range bombers before they got anywhere to be a threat to the UK. And it was an amazing job, but I was having to hide who I was. And that's the same for the majority of LGBT plus people in the armed forces of that period. You had to live two lives. You had to live the life that everybody saw and respected you for, and you did the job well, hopefully, and so on. They saw that, but you had to hide your own personal life. That puts a huge amount of pressure on people.
I
And
was just going to say, Caroline, that must be such a pressured situation, because not only have you got the pressure of trying to hide who you are, such a high pressure job as well.
Yeah, exactly. And mine was a high pressure job, but all jobs are high pressure within the military. It's that kind of environment. So, you know, you're putting extra pressures on your people, which all because they just want to be themselves. And they had crazy reasons like, well, there's a blackmail risk. So if people knew that you were gay, for instance, they would blackmail you, and you would give away the secrets. Well, the only reason they can blackmail you is because you're banned from serving. If they lifted the ban, then you're not a blackmail risk. But nobody saw it from that perspective. It was just more of an excuse to stop anybody who was different from joining the military and being in the military. So yeah, it did put a lot of pressure on people. And the consequences for me was, if I was outed, it wasn't just about losing the job, which I loved doing. It's about losing that income, and therefore I was able to afford rented accommodation, so I had my own private life, so I could live those two lives. If that was taken away from me, so I'd lose my job, my income, my house. I knew I'd lose my family, and I would also lose my friends. So everything is taken away from you. So it's a really scary thing to know that your difference will bring that down upon you if you're discovered. I was quite fortunate in that I served, and I got to be myself openly. And I transitioned gender in the armed forces in 1999, and I became the first openly serving transgender officer in the British Armed Forces. But there's an awful lot of people who weren't so lucky, and they were outed. And we'll talk about what happened to them when we come to the charity, and talk a little bit more about the work we're doing, because it had traumatic effects on people. So myself, to cut a very long story short, I managed to get through into my 30s before realizing that I was missing my own life and I needed to do something about it. And I wanted to transition gender and just be myself, doing the job that I love doing. And so I went outside of the military to private medical resources and built up a medical portfolio, walked into a medical officer's appointment and said, "There you go, this is all about me, and this is who I am, and this is what I want to do." And I fully expected to be thrown out of the military. But there was lots of discussions of legal policy and employment policy and medical policy, and they discussed my future. And then eventually the answer came down was I could stay, which was absolutely brilliant to me. But what I didn't realize was the ban was still in place, the military was still hostile to LGBT plus people, and I just made myself visible. So that subjected me then to an awful lot of prejudice and hateful comments, and I was outed in the newspapers, and that kind of happened the same. And I realized I had to prove everybody wrong. I was being labeled a liability and a danger to my colleagues, and that I shouldn't be allowed to be in the military. And I decided to prove them wrong. And I ended up, I was on tactical helicopters by then, trooping helicopters, brought a new helicopter into service, Merlin, carries 24 soldiers, 4 crew. And we went out to Iraq, we went out to Afghanistan, and I was the tactics and platform protection specialist flying on those aircraft. So I won lots of commendations for exceptional service. And that wasn't all about me winning commendations for exceptional service. That was showing that me as a trans woman could do my job. And people started to see that, and the inclusion started happening, and people started realizing that, hey, you know, if you can do your job, that's all that matters. So it took a while for the military, all 3 services, to transition from being hostile and exclusive of LGBT plus people to being told that they had to be inclusive, because it was a legal case that was won, so they were told to do that. But then that realization that actually it was a good thing to be told to do, and it was empowering. Having diversity and having that inclusion is a power, not a weakness. And over a period of 6 or 7 years, the military has transformed to what we see today. So the military we know of today is fully inclusive, and it's proud of its LGBT plus service personnel. But that, you know, in our very, very recent past, that wasn't the way it was.
So obviously, I think there's a lot of issues there that you obviously faced during your career. And Gemma, you work very closely with LGBTQ plus veterans and their families today. And do you find that there are common issues there that are shared? I mean, obviously everyone's story is unique and different, but do you find that there are common issues running through that community?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, everybody's experiences are totally unique. But the one thing I think about the military is it's not just a job, and most veterans will tell you this. It's, you know, it's the roof over your head, it's the food on your table, it's your entire support network. Veterans today, they have a transition program when they go into civilian life. The people we support, they didn't have that same transition. You know, they were literally discharged onto the street with no support, finding themselves with no secure housing, estranged from their families, you know, with financial hardship. So we see a lot of common struggles that people face. Isolation. We're talking about people that have, you know, suddenly found themselves in a world where they don't have their comrades around them. They may have been outed to their families. They've lost their whole support network. Some even given criminal records. So they found it really, really difficult to secure employment. So we see a lot of employment difficulties, financial hardship, like I said, isolation. So there are a lot of common themes.
And I'm also right in thinking that probably up until recently, we didn't really have a kind of a precise idea about the number of LGBTQ plus veterans that there are here in the UK. But Caroline, I think that's changed recently, hasn't it, with the recent census data?
Yeah, it has, which is brilliant for us to have that, not just for LGBT veterans, but for the veterans population as a whole. But for Census 21, the questions included a question on whether you were a veteran and whether you'd served in the regulars or the reserves and the cadet forces, but also a question on sexual orientation and gender identity. So we've been kind of quite excited about being able to see that data, to see where the veterans are, where the veterans populations are, and where the LGBT population is. And it's proven really interesting to us. So I've got a couple of statistics here. So 13.6% of the veterans population is recorded as female and 86.4 male. And that reflected the makeup of the armed forces over the last 40 years or so or more, where the percentage of women within the armed forces has been below 10%. It's only recently increased to above that. So it's about 13-14% I know now. But of those, 3% of female veterans identify as lesbian or gay, and 0.6 identify as male as being lesbian gay. That's a tiny number when you compare that the LGBT population outside of the veterans, including everybody, was 3.1% were LGBT plus. That's a low number as well. But when you look at the census and the data, there's an awful lot of people who didn't ask questions. So 7% of the population didn't answer the question on sexual orientation. 6% didn't answer the question on gender identity. So it gives us an approximation, which is brilliant, but it doesn't tell us the full picture and why. It doesn't tell us why people aren't declaring those and so on. But what I think is fascinating, especially for the East Midlands region or any region, or you can break those numbers down into much smaller groupings of populations. So you could break it down into, say, Nottingham and look at the veterans population. It will tell you the population of Nottingham. It will tell you what percentage of that population is a veteran, and it will also tell you what percentage of that population declared themselves as being openly LGBT plus. So that's quite useful information when you're trying to provide support services.
Yeah, some interesting numbers, and like you say, it gives us an approximation, but not necessarily the full picture there. So if we turn our attention now to the charity itself, so Fighting with Pride, I believe that the formation of the charity coincided with the 20th anniversary of the complete lifting of the ban on LGBTQ plus service. So Caroline, tell us a little bit more about the charity, how you got it started, and its aims.
So Fighting with Pride formed, as you say, on the 20th anniversary of the lifting of the ban in 2020, and we launched at an event in Westminster Palace, which was an event to celebrate the inclusion of LGBT plus people in the armed forces. But what we realised was that although the armed forces has moved forward and is really good at that, not perfect, nowhere's perfect, but it's really good at that, nobody had ever looked at what happened to those people who were dismissed or pushed out of the armed forces when the ban was in place. And they're still there, they're still out there, and nobody had ever wanted or tried to understand what had happened to them and the consequences of the ban. And Gemma's touched on some of those consequences, but just to explain, if you were identified or reported, or somebody just rumoured, even rumour control said that you were a gay man, say for instance, then and you were outed, you would then be removed from somebody would walk in, tap you on the shoulder if you're having lunch, take you away to an office, and you'd be sat in that office waiting for a special investigations branch of the police. If you're in the Air Force, it would be the RAF Special Investigations, and the Navy and the Army had their own. You would then go for an interrogation. It was an interrogation. All of the veterans report it as an interrogation, because they were not only trying to determine that you were gay, they're also trying to determine who else you knew who was gay. And that was without legal representation, that was without breaks, that was in solitary confinement, and they were treated really badly. But then they were also sent for medical inspections for evidence, and then they would be either court-martialed, and at court-martial they could get a criminal record, a criminal conviction for consensual same-sex relationship, or as long as so it was 21 was the 1967 Sexual Offences Act, and then obviously it came down. But so you would then be thrown out. If you had medals, those medals will be ripped off your chest, so you don't deserve those. They were told that they didn't deserve to be veterans. They were told that they should never ever refer to themselves as veterans. They weren't given any kind of support when they left. It was just, there's the door, there's the base, there's the gate, get out. We don't want to see your kind here. And then they were isolated from friends, and even their friends within the military didn't want to chat to them, because if they did, then they would be investigated, and with the risk of the same thing happening to them as well. And so you can imagine that you've gone from having loads of friends, your family, a great job, people are proud of the job you're doing, and then somebody taps you on the shoulder, and then it's all gone, all in an instant. And you've got a criminal record, and you've got nowhere to live, and so on. And so that's had obviously a massively negative mental health impact on veterans who went through that. And that's what we tried to address. So when we set up Fighting with Pride, we did that because Fighting with Pride was kind of triggered by a book, if you like. So there's a guy called Craig Jones, who's a Royal Navy Lieutenant Commander, who decided to write a book on the experiences of LGBT plus personnel serving in the military from World War II right through to today. And he chose 10 stories, and I was one of them as a co-author. And we've got a World War II Military Cross winner as one of the contributors, and so on. And when we looked at those stories and realised that they included people who had, and that book was called Fighting with Pride, who had those experiences and nothing had been done about it, we decided to set up the charity, and we took the name from the book. So that's where Fighting with Pride came from. And then we set ourselves 4 key aims. The first one was to change that, to find the veterans and show them that their service is respected, and that support is there, and it wants to support them, and it's there to help them, which is a really difficult one, because as Gemma said, they're isolated and disconnected from all of that now. The second one is to raise awareness amongst organisations that might have veterans as members or support veterans, just to show them how to be openly inclusive. So a veteran won't come along and join in an activity if they think they're not going to be treated with respect. So it's about showing how you can show that visibly. Also, we set up a research programme, because obviously you need academic research to change policy. So those government and local government and NHS England and all those kinds of places need that policy to be able to justify spending money on resources to help do something about that. But we also worked with the government to get the government to admit that this was a horrendous way to treat people who had signed up to serve their country, and how badly you've treated them, and that there should be apologies and things. And we gave evidence to a select committee on the Armed Forces Bill in Parliament in 2021. And as a consequence of that, an LGBT plus veterans independent review was announced. And that was launched in January of this year. The chair was announced in June, and then from June to December, there was a big call for requesting people to submit evidence on what it was like to be LGBT plus in the armed forces. Not just LGBT plus people, but those around them, their colleagues, their friends, their family, and so on. That's all being gathered now, and it's being worked on, and then that gets reported to the government in June. And then the government has to make a decision on all the recommendations that will fall out of that report, and then it gets briefed to Parliament later on in the year. So it's kind of a really, really important year for us as a charity in supporting those veterans and delivering change. And so we're delighted to be able to be here today and help raise that awareness to maybe help other people to understand why we're doing this and why we need this to happen.
It's obviously been incredibly busy couple of years for you since the charity launched, and Gemma, you work very much kind of on the ground in the community. Can you talk us through a little bit about what your role's like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with a really great team of community workers. We're right across the UK, from Scotland right down to the southeast, and we're here. We're here to support veterans with all of those issues that we mentioned. If somebody's got a financial difficulty, or they're impacted by poor mental health, we're here to connect them up with signposting, information, support, those people that can help them out. We also work with lots of organisations, so we work alongside other military charities, like Caroline said, to try and make sure that we can give veterans a warm welcome whenever they seek support through those organisations. But we do lots of fab stuff as well. We have lots of really, really great community events. We march at Pride events. We had a week-long writing retreat in Devon. We've done, what else have we done? We've done a week in Snowdonia on an activity retreat. We've got a battlefield tour coming up. And I think you can't underestimate the absolute power and benefit of just bringing people together and the positive impact that has on their lives. We've got people who've been isolated, and actually just knowing you've got a support network of people around you who understand you, I think it makes those impossible problems seem a little bit smaller when you've got those people around them.
I guess probably especially so important after the past couple of years we've had, where I suppose that sense of isolation that people were feeling could have been heightened by the pandemic as well. And now you're able to offer these services to physically bring people together again.
Absolutely. It's about connecting those people back together, and it's about giving them their dignity back and their self-esteem and a sense of purpose, really. And it's absolutely, it's tremendous to see everybody together, actually, and it's just an absolutely positive force.
And Caroline, I thought it was interesting earlier that you mentioned that some people had their medals taken away from them when they were forced out of the military. And I know medal return is one particular area that you offer support with. Why is that so important, such an important role for the charity to provide?
Well, somebody who's earned a medal has done something incredible. And for that to be snatched away from them because of who they were is just absolutely appalling. They've earned that medal, and it's not like they pretended they were there and somebody found out and said you weren't there, we'll take the medal back. And it's the way it was done. And medals, if you've earned them, they don't come along very often, actually. And if you've earned a medal, it's a big mark of respect. But it's also part of your service identity. And when you go to the picture that Gemma's got behind her, the stand, is some of our veterans at the cenotaph. And when you go to the cenotaph and everybody's wearing their medals and you can't wear yours because it was snatched from you, and that's a triggering moment for something horrible that happened in their lives. So we want to make sure that anybody who had their medals removed like that has them returned. And so there was the policy was written by the MOD to enable to do that, and we helped to steer that as much as we could. But it's an MOD policy. But it still needs a little bit of work doing on it, because at the moment it still seems that you're applying for something that you've lost or something that was stolen. It's not taking into account the fact of how it was removed from you. And also there's an element of it's the same with uniform. Some of our veterans were told never to wear a beret at the cenotaph or to wear items of uniform because they shouldn't be considering themselves as veterans. And so they won't do that because that's what they were told and they feel shamed. But we want them to be able to do that. So it's restoring, having that letter annulled by somebody from the armed forces or from the Ministry of Defence to say, we told you to do this, but actually that was wrong, and you are fully entitled as a veteran to wear your beret at ceremonial remembrance events and things like that. Big thing to our veterans, and you can't support somebody's mental health unless you address all of the little triggers and things that are there from the way that they were treated. You have to find those, and medals is part of it. Medals isn't everything. Medals is part of it. There's a huge they lost pensions, so we're as one of the recommendations, we're hoping it will come out of the independent review, which will be a look at pensions to make sure that those entitled to pensions should be able to get them. We're looking at removal of criminal convictions as markers for something that wasn't illegal within British law at the time. It was just a military thing. We're looking at resettlement packages because they were denied all of that. So when you leave the military, you get a resettlement package which makes sure that you've got the right skills to transition from being in the military into civil life. And they never had that, so we want that. And we also want an apology, and the apology has to be a meaningful apology. It can't be, sorry, we really sorry the way you were treated. It has to be a really meaningful apology, and that will impact everybody, because not all veterans were charged and thrown out of the military. Some were bumped into a corridor and told, we know that you're LGBT plus, if you don't resign now, then you know what's going to happen to you. And so people were forced out that way, and very few records would record that. It wouldn't be recorded. It would be put down as somebody resigning, but actually it was constructive dismissal in a way. There's lots of different things going on that we need to support. And on top of all of that, when you look at, if we brought veterans into the room and they told you their stories, I guarantee you would be in tears at some of the stories that they've got to tell us. And we push those stories out to places where it needs to be heard. And there has to be a level of compensation for those individuals that have suffered that. So that's one of the recommendations that we're pushing forward as well.
And with all that, obviously, there's such a high level of work that's going on. And Gemma touched on it earlier about the other kind of groups and organisations that you work with. So why do you think it's important that other community groups, a bit like Nottingham Forest Community Trust, the work that we're doing, for example, why do you think it's important that other organisations continue to support the veteran community?
I'll let Gem answer that one if you would like to, Gem.
Yeah, I think it's really important for the veterans that we support to feel able to and confident in accessing support and the same services as everyone else that's served. You know, we're talking about people that, like Caroline said, they felt they weren't able to call themselves veterans anymore. And it's really important for us that they're able to do that, and they're able to walk through the door of you know, an organisation like Forest Forces, knowing that that's going to be a really warm, welcoming environment for them. So I think it's, you know, it's really important for organisations to demonstrate that they are really fully inclusive, just, you know, so that people can access them with confidence.
It's keeping that conversation going on a wider level, isn't it? And generally making sure we continue to raise awareness. So before we finish, Caroline, I suppose it's a good time now to look ahead. What do the next few years look like for Fighting with Pride?
So we've got the independent review, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is reporting its recommendations and findings in June, and that's going to shape the outcomes of that is going to shape where we actually go as a charity next. But one of our biggest challenges has always been outreach and finding the veterans. We bump into our veterans, as Gemma said, we march in Pride. We march in Pride to be visible so that any LGBT veterans out there know there is a community of LGBT veterans that they can get in touch with and either seek support or just friendship, or just be able to talk to somebody who's been through similar lived experiences. And so it's really important to us to have more visibility. We need to reach more. We know from that census data, we know roughly, approximately how many veterans are out there, and we just need to be more visible. That's it's a challenge. It's we've been on radio, we've been on television, we've been in printed press, we've been on the internet. We've got some great partners who put stuff out. We put newsletters out. We've got a website. We've got social media. But you still meet a veteran at Pride who comes up to you because they saw the banner that said LGBT veterans on it, and they've never heard of any of that, and they've never heard of the independent review, and that's been pushed out all over the country. So, you know, people don't necessarily pick up on these things because, as Gemma has already said, they're disconnected from that community. They don't look for messages where you would normally send messages for LGBT veterans because they don't feel that they're included at the moment. And so any opportunity like Forest Forces is just fantastic for us to show them that's all changed. It's all different.
So finally, I guess, what is the best way for people if they want to keep up to date with what the work that you're doing with the charity, and if they want to get involved, what's the best way for them to do that?
We have a website which is www.fightingwithpride.org.uk, and we have our Twitter account is at ampersand, isn't it? Fighting W Pride, and we got our Facebook page which is Fighting with Pride, and we've got an Instagram one as well.
Yeah,
Gemma,
we've got an Instagram as well, and that's at Fighting with Pride. And if you go on the website as well, you can also sign up to our newsletter as well, so that tells you all about the events and, you know, where we're going to be and what we're doing.
And we'll make sure that all those links, we'll add all of those to the comments underneath this video, so they're accessible for everyone. So Caroline, Gemma, thank you for today. Thank you for talking so passionately and honestly about the work that you do. Like I say, all those links are going to be under the video for Fighting with Pride. You can also keep up to date with Nottingham Forest Community Trust's Forest Forces programme, as well as what we're doing for LGBTQ plus History Month and the events we've got planned for Pride later this year as well. So all that information, we'll pop that underneath the comments section as well, so all the links that you need. So that's it, guys. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for showing an interest in both Fighting with Pride and Nottingham Forest Community Trust.